right. And we are live. So, as we are welcoming folks to another edition of Kudomusicology, a Ludomusicology Literature review, I'm your host, the Musicologess. And with me today is the unstoppable George Reid.
Hello. Unstoppable. Hi, everybody.
Welcome to the stream. I'm so happy to have you for so many reasons. One of them is that this work is brilliant. Another of them is you did all the channel art for this channel. This channel literally would not exist without you.
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure. I mean, and again, as we were just discussing beforehand, it kind of was a serendipitous meeting, I think, just randomly posting my art, and then it grew from there. So,
yeah. I've been a fan. And then I tentatively approached you through Instagram. I was like, hey, maybe this could happen. And then the avalanche of just awesome pieces. Yes, Julianne, love the art so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, if y'all want your own gorgeous pixel art, you can commission some. Just putting that out there. If you like want a little, like that bottom right corner, that little like me reading a book, you could get your own little portrait or something. Julianne's trying to find an excuse to commission something.
Oh, anything. Just say, we're celebrating the anniversary of having the washing machine put in. I will do something. Anything.
Having the washing machine put in.
Well, it's the goldfish's birthday. Okay, we'll figure something out. It'll be great.
You could do a portrait of the goldfish for the birthday.
Well, yeah. Well, why not?
Why not?
I'm just very happy that it's turned out so nice, and you're happy with it. And avalanche is the right word, because I think I sent you storyboards of sort of ideas that like one of them was you reading one of your book chapters to a Game Boy on a swing in a park, and and all these amazing ideas.
Here I can actually transition. We'll show all the scenes really quick. So the first one, which you won't see, but the stream is going to see. Oh. First one is Game Boy tapping its foot in front of the campfire. And yeah, because it was kind of pitched as like, what if it was like a title screen of a video game? So like that's why it has like the start and the options. So cute. Yeah. Like really adds to the aesthetic. And then I love this little Ludomusicology, maybe the musicologist can help, sitting in like the dark library at night.
The candle going in.
Yeah. And then the third one is me and Game Boy standing on a bridge, because I'm a big like nature fan, so I kept saying I love greens, I love like forests. And so we kind of went from there. And then the fourth one here is I have now joined the Game Boy in front of the campfire, and we're warming our hands. And I say you bleep so beautifully.
The hearts as well. Sort of
yeah, the little like love hearts. It's very anime in the best way.
I thought I was so nervous, I will admit, because I love when you said, I like green, I like nature and forest. I thought excellent, because I love drawing trees and waterfalls and like the tiles of sort of 2D playscapes. Drawing people I've never ever been excellent at, so I was very nervous to sort of get something that looked cool. So I'm very happy with that it turned out okay.
Yeah, and I'm even in my little like book reading, but sitting on the rock here in the corner, I have a little like fascinator in my hair, which is very, very observant, because I wear so much of that stuff and like post pictures on Instagram. So that was directly inspired by my feed. Yeah.
Yeah, the inspiration came from that, and also I think green Doc Marten boots are also in the picture somewhere.
That's a very good choice.
Yeah, I thought green, we'll do green, and a cozy jumper, because cozy jumpers are amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to be cozy. Yeah. So what got you into the pixel art specifically? I know this is beside our chapter for the moment, but because you also do chip tuning, so were those kind of a hand in hand, just an interest in playing in these early technologies?
They've always been synesthetically linked, because growing up, video games as are for many of us, they've been so important in just how we understand things and enjoy things. And my dad owned a Commodore Amiga A500 computer, and we had Dad had a lot of friends who would pirate copy discs for us, because we couldn't really afford the proper stuff, and so for me as a kid, the norm were pirate discs that had like demo scene stuff before them, all these interesting interplays between chip music and sort of early proto 3D geometries and pixel art. So that was, even at the age of sort of 5, 6, I learned how to put the floppy disk in, and that was the norm. I didn't understand that this was kind of like a subcultural thing. So the connection between chiptune and pixel art has always been very strong for me. And even beyond games, like if there were environments that I encountered in game, let's say forests that are beautifully detailed in pixels and so forth, if we went somewhere to visit, walking around forests in real life and lakes, the same kinds of experiences and imagination as a kid kind of linked the two together. There was something that translated beyond the game, and so for me, there's a magic to these kinds of things because they've always inspired the imagination. The same goes with chip music too. And as we were saying before the stream went live, it was really the pandemic that sort of pushed me to get my stuff out there, because it had really been a hobby prior to this. It was something I did to just sort of sit down and relax and draw these lovely dreamscapes and sunsets, and things like that, just places that were inspiring and made me happy. And the same goes with chiptune, these kinds of fantastical, limited sounds, but limited and yet inspire such, feels, I guess, is the only way I can really put it in language, because you can't really capture it in language. So it's always been there for me. But I think more recently, the two have come together more to the forefront. Absolutely.
Yeah, I like using the phrase kind of from my academic editing. I do a lot of like social sciences projects, and when they're setting out a qualitative or quantitative study and they talk about there's limitations, I had a limited amount of time to do this. I didn't have monetary resources to like fund a study, but they also talk about delimitations, which is all about creating scope and like giving the work its form. And that's often how I think of these types of technologies. Like you need a form, you don't have a work until you start making some of those choices. So instead of thinking about like, oh, I'm choosing, limitation, it's like I'm choosing, a vehicle that is also going to allow the work to exist. And then instead you focus on the affordances and everything that opens up because you made that choice.
Right. It's a very and this goes back to the pixel art thing. For example, the stuff I did for you, I thought, well, I'm going to limit myself to an NES color palette, and I know that those kinds of gaming is very much a part of things you've enjoyed, part of your identity, and so I thought, well, and it's also interesting to kind of think, well, I don't have these colors. Perhaps I can substitute them for these colors and trick the eye. Same with chiptune. The limitation really for me inspires creativity.
Yeah.
And the self-awareness is almost like I'm thinking of the notion of remediation, perhaps, and hypermediacy. You're very much aware and self-aware and want to remind whoever's viewing it of the medium. It goes back to McLuhan, that the medium is the message to some degree, because you are sort of setting a seedbed out for yourself, and the work comes from blossoms through the limitations, but the limitations very much define the form. So yeah, there's an interesting interplay between those mediums and how you limit yourself and what you can do with it. I think that's creatively, I need limits like that. There are days when, for example, I open up Logic Pro or something, I feel so lost. All the things I can do, I think, well, okay, some kind of something that will refine me to a certain palette and what I can do with it and what I can push and what I can play with. And play is very important again here as well. I think that's very much the case.
Yeah, the play is it really emphasizes the process of creation, and having that playfulness opens up areas that you might not have consciously thought to do, but just sort of, let me try a different timbre in my Fami tracker as I'm putting something together. Let me adjust some of the parameters of this instrument and then see how it sounds with everything else that I've been setting up. Maybe I have like a really good bass groove going or something, and I'm trying to like match to it in interesting ways. Yeah, Julian's saying the analogy between musical and colorful tones and constraints is brilliant. And I think a lot of us in gaming, we do link these things. And they don't have to be. I mean, you can have kind of chip style music with like, fake bit or entirely non-chip tune music, and it can still sort of work affectively.
Course. I mean, and I'm afraid I can't see the chat, guys. I'm very sorry. But I think that's a really lovely thing, and the whole. Of course, you don't have to use original hardware or even I think that's why I never really, from early on, I was never really involved with the chip scene, because I sort of dipped my toes in goodness knows how many years back, and because I was using samples and emulations of certain things, there were certain opinions that just really, and I just thought, I'm too bloody tired to do, you know what I mean? So if and the point about mediation is that mediation can also be emulated in certain ways, and you can still get these kinds of sounds, which is why research-wise I'm going more towards timbre.
Yeah.
Because timbre also links with the notion like music and color, tastes, memory, all these things are linked through timbre. And so vividly I can hear sounds from the games of my childhood, and I can think about places I've been as though they've never left, and things like that. I think that's where I'm kind of going research-wise, because I don't think it should be something that's limited to a certain set of tools, or because it involves owning original stuff, and things like that involves a certain amount of social and economic capital, cultural capital, even to maintain them, to operate them. If you can access chip sounds in any which way that's comfortable for you, it's chiptune, in my opinion. I think that's that's the beauty of it. But I think there is, even with, no matter what you do, whether it's emulation, whether it's sampling, you are capturing a form of mediation, which I would consider to be the limitations of micro audio hardware. In some way, and it's still valid, I think. So
yeah,
however you do it.
And we're seeing a lot of examples, and I will keep reading chat to you since you don't have Twitch open at the moment. One less thing to have open, it's fine. We just finished the Pixel remaster of Final Fantasy VI last night on Stream Team, and the pixel art has been mostly preserved. They've done some interesting things with like water effects, and like there is some non-pixel stuff being done, and they've kind of zhuzhed it up a little bit. But the music is all orchestrated and arranged, so they're taking that original SNES sound, and then they're creating these new versions of it. And a lot of our playthrough was sort of comparing it against the original, and like seeing what we thought of some of the choices that were made, and even things like Dancing Mad at the end. There were moments where we're like, kind of wish that bass had gone a little harder, been a little bit more punchy with the articulation. So it is interesting what we were attached to in the original, and the sort of how we expected that to go. And then there were areas where they added new material, or they sort of made different choices than we would have expected, and like sometimes that worked out really well. So this is a thing we're seeing more and more with these remakes, is that we're kind of updating the music that fans are very attached to. And yet you can still play that, and I don't think it's too jarring of an experience to play it with that pixel style art, but have the symphony orchestra recording. It still sort of works. So there is a malleability here. It's nice when they go together and they're in the same style, and that aesthetic is really unified. But that's the neat thing about when you have the gameplay and the image, and then you have the music, is you can have a lot of different relationships between the two.
Sure, and I saw just I finally actually managed to do something technical. I've opened Twitch, by the way. So
yeah.
But I've just seen Greg. Hello, by the way. As said, there is a bit of a disconnect when they see pixel art, but here recorded non-chiptune audio, and I think a lot of that comes down to I think when because media literacy, for example, and expecting what we're used to, what we've experienced beforehand with certain kinds of sounds in relation to image and video game play. So I think the remasters and things are quite interesting, because they tend to of course they can refreshen things, revitalize things in very interesting ways, but they also tend to upset a lot of people, I've noticed, and musically too. I don't know. I don't know what I can't put my. I have no definitive answer for the reason for updating audio in certain ways, I guess, because I know that there are a lot of demakes and things around now that very deliberately, again, striving for a certain kind of sonic aesthetic and a limitation that is hypermediacy par excellence, because it is reminding the person consuming it of the medium, i.e. an audio chip or something that is limited or synthesized overtly so. So I think it's quite an interesting phenomenon. And I've just seen as well, you deal with this personally as a composer. That's quite interesting. So again, please feel free to fill the chat.
Yeah, feel free to keep jumping in. So all of this is kind of circling around why we're here today, which is the beautiful article Chiptune, the Ludomusical Shaping of Identity, which was published in the Computer Games Journal in 2018. And this is sort of a distillation, would you say, of the PhD project?
It's a snapshot, and it's a snapshot using a very specific kind of case study that I look at in the project overall, because it was certain chapters look at certain problems and then use certain case studies through which to illustrate them. And this kind of creativity is quite ubiquitous. You know, if you think of any kind of, there's 8-bit Enya, there's 8-bit, all the kinds of genres have had some kind of chip musical treatment, and I find that quite interesting, just from a creative perspective, but also how it relates to identity, which then, as a snapshot, reflects the broader problems that I address in my PhD. Because my fundamental questions are, how is identity shaped through musical interactions, and through what process does this take shape? And my main interest is how we can then analytically grasp what happens in situ of musical play, because identity is retrospective, it's something that builds over time, but what happens in the music? And then we might think, okay, well, why chiptune? Well, it's not something that I'm absolutely bloody obsessed with, and it's something that is absolutely ingrained in every cell of my body. But chiptune also raises very interesting questions that I didn't really, not only in the realm of chiptune in academia, which is still very, very young and burgeoning in similar ways that Ludomusicology is, but music studies, music fan studies, didn't really, the roles of sound itself, timbre, technology, what are these things doing? Because they have an agency in the process. So chiptune for me really foregrounds these kinds of problems and how to navigate them. So this snapshot introduces the way sort of that I use Bradotti to identify certain problems, and I also think it's one of the most fun, because that they can chiptune covers of popular music or whatever kind of music can be kitsch, camp, fun. They can anger people. They can they can, for some they're better than the original. They cause all kinds of interesting discourse, and I'm wondering. That for me was really a kind of a spark of thinking, it does something very interesting to subjectivity and memory and culture here. So that was really the seeds of where this came from.
Right. And so this version you gave as a conference presentation a couple times, and then what was the process of getting it into the Computer Games Journal?
So I'm going to echo a lot of things Peter said in the last stream, actually, because it was the first time I gave this paper was at NACVGM 2018, which was my first NACVGM ever, and I was
petrified. Where I met you.
I know, and you gave me the nicest hug after my paper. I thought, oh my god, I think I was the last paper on the conference, actually. So I thought, oh my goodness. So thank you. And I also met Julianne there as well, and several other wonderful people. And so just to quickly say thank you guys so much, because I was petrified. It was snowing. I didn't know whether I was going to get home. All these things. So yes, I gave it first at NACVGM 2018, and then a slightly edited version I gave at the Ludomusicology conference in Leipzig, Germany, and it was a quite a quick turnaround to produce this paper, because I was at a stage in my PhD where I thought, right, well, I know that I've sort of digested the theory I want to use. I'm beginning to find my own voice. I wasn't quite there yet. I was still one thing you will. I don't know if anyone in the chat can agree, or perhaps you yourself. Sometimes when you use theory, you sometimes feel the weight of the authority of the people that you're using, and you worry about, okay, well, I don't want to adapt it wholesale because certain things don't apply. You want to make it your own, but it's a very, the theory itself can help you see things and understand things better and be sharper. And again, I say this to my students: theory should always be something that helps you understand something you didn't understand previously. It's not just a label you put on and say, this is this. It's a tool of analysis. So I thought, well, I could try and distill this into my paper and sort of give an outline of Bradotti and why it's useful for me. And so it was more refined by the time I presented it in Leipzig. And then I was contacted by the lovely Melanie Fritsch about a special edition. And that was in July. And I think, as Peter said before, by October, I think they had the drafts.
Wow, that was quick.
And it was it was quite a turnaround, and then published in December, if memory serves. So it was a very, very quick process, and I think that my advice really is that if you're going to give conference papers, just because I know some people tend to. Some people are more comfortable sort of being more improvisatory with conference papers.
Certainly not me.
No.
I put in stage directions. I don't just have the words. I have like when to change the slide. I have like, you need to pause here and take a breath.
Yeah.
I need to be very rigid.
I am so happy you said that, because I even have brackets slide, brackets water, because I get the driest mouth and, the lips stick, which is not gorgeous at all. So, but it depends how you operate. But what my point will be is that if you are someone who improvises, if you are someone who needs a script, just write it up anyway. Because if you are contacted to say, we loved this, please put this in the, you've got something already written up. And the turnaround between Ludo and having that published was so quick. I don't think I would have completed it in time had I not had
already had something to work off of.
Right, references, everything, So that would be my advice on this matter.
I really like putting "Take a breath, you fool" in the script.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can kind of almost like leave, it's only for your eyes, so you can kind of have directions to yourself that no one else is going to see. So
exactly, and you can be frightfully rude to yourself as well. I tend to do that sometimes. I think, right, just please make sure your shoulders are back. You're standing.
Posture. Yeah.
Posture. You're not crouched over your desk now. You are in front of people. That just make sure and all these things. But then doing that, I think, for me, relaxes me in some way, because I sort of think, you're fine. It's slightly.
I know if I feel kind of over prepared, then I can kind of relax on that preparation in the moment, and then I tend to enjoy it more too. So
Absolutely.
And that's not to say that, there are folks that are just brilliant at being a little bit more off the cuff, maybe just having kind of bullet points and extrapolating from there in real time. But I've never been that person. So you have to kind of learn your style, I think.
Absolutely. And the other bit of advice, which I don't know if this might not work for everybody, I record myself speaking. And even if you do it in front of a mirror, and watch how you're talking, watch how you're breathing is another thing, because there are so many times sort of early on I would run out of breath, and that happens anyway. I'm quite a nervous, shy person in some in some regards. So you really have to sort of. Anyway, this is completely off. I'm so sorry, but basically it's turned into a coaching session. Basically, it came from a conference paper that sort of developed by invitation. So that would be my sort of advice there. Make sure it's all written up, but yes, it was. And Peter's was the same. It was an invitation for a special edition. On quite rather broad subjects and. Papers from that conference. So.
Yeah. So we open with just, okay, if we're going to use a term like chiptune, what do we mean by that? And what I like, you have a really expansive definition. It's not this kind of gatekeeping, like chiptune is this but not this. You just say, describes the microsound genesis of early video game sound and music, very broad. And then you mention how it's inherently expansive because it can be things that are trying to sound as if they could come, or you could actually play them on an NES. You know, there are folks that work within those limitations with size and everything. But there's also folks that add more channels than were possible, make much longer arrangements than you might have seen in those. And then there's fusion with any other style that exists. Literally, like Google it, and you know, if you're looking for like 8-bit, you know, New Kids on the Block, it's out there.
There is 8-bit ASMR.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, and that's the beauty of chiptune for me. And I'm going to echo Chipcell on this, who is a fabulous chip musician. Who I check, I mean, because their stuff just makes me happy. I mean, I go running to Chipcell's music. You know, it's Chipcell said that with chiptune, there's sort of no kind of expectation for the kind of music you produce. And I like that because, of course, you have the base medium, you have the limitations which kind of anchor you to certain sounds, but you know, you can do what you like, and it just sounds wonderful. And the gatekeepy stuff, I think that's why I don't think I ever will be very active in the chip scene, really, because it is tiring. I find it very, very tiring, and actually moreover boring, because you know, of course, you can get certain sounds with hardware you can't in emulation, but I kind of go vice versa. Mm-hmm. You can do, you know, if you are in a digital audio workstation and you have samples, and if your way of working is via a MIDI keyboard, and you know, if you're comfortable with doing that, it's still chiptune in my opinion, because you are, you know, timbrally, you know. So I always like the broadness of it, and I think you know, as we discussed before, that the scene and the gatekeeping is stuff that Dominique Pelletier is working on, and very, very much importantly talks about, because it is something that, you know, it's very off-putting, very, very off-putting for people that are trying to get into it, and if anyone here is interested in a sort of a Discord that's more sort of open-ended and helpful, it's called A Bit of Chiptune on Discord. Yeah, it's just
love that.
People like Cass Cuttlefish, you know, and the vibe there is totally different. I joined fairly recently, actually, because I just thought I'll just wander along doing my thing, and so I think the importance of having open definitions is paramount. You know, you can't. And so this, you know,
and I you use scare quotes in the article, which I appreciate. Authentic, right? Spiky word right there. But right. You mentioned that like this incorporates people that are using, you know, their hacked Game Boy, and they're hooking that up and using that like an instrument in real time. That sort of chip tuning versus fake bit, which can be, again, going beyond space limitations, adding more instruments than would have been available, more channels, virtual emulations, using software, like any of this. So it all falls under chiptune, which is a nice way to define it.
There's a genre called 9-bit, for example, which, I mean, even in the name, it kind of actively implies you've got a little bit of more space to work with, you know, an extra bit of information, you know, it's as you were saying, something. The authentic thing in quotes is something I do in the PhD, and I say in a footnote, the reason I do this is because authenticity is subjective. It's ephemeral, but that's not to say that, you know, we all have ideas of what is authentic to us. They are embodied, they're embedded, they're very important, they're bodily responses. However, when that comes down to you know, discriminating or gatekeeping, you know,
and it comes up so much in fan studies, which is another piece of this project as well. Like there's a lot of maybe just anxiety about the sort of object of fandom and maybe our own attachments to the items that we are, you know, adding to our fan identity, and so we can get kind of weirdly protective of them, and you know, weird about how other people are constructing their headcanon around it, and there's a lot of fanxiety. I love that word, Julianne.
Fanxiety. I saw Julia's quote just now about the definition and being thrown around.
Hmm.
I mean, it's interesting because what I think annoys me the most about the gatekeeping thing is that chiptune began as a cheap way to make music. People didn't, people that used like Pro Tracker on the Amiga, you couldn't have access to a studio. It was
Hmm.
costed too much. Now it costs too much to have the original hardware, and people are being snobby about it.
Hmm.
I'm going, for goodness sake, like surely sampling and emulating and free stuff, delicious free things are in keeping with the spirit of it. So I really I think it's a shame in some regards, So, but and anyone listening, if it sounds like chiptune, it's chiptune. just enjoy it, please.
Yeah. So we have some opening questions in the article that sort of lead us along the rose path here to our eventual thesis. I'm going to quote you here. Given this creative expanse and furthermore the demographic heterogeneity of chiptune fans, how can we understand chiptune creativity in relation to the identity of the composer, especially
Hmm.
if her creativity is explicitly intertextual? Furthermore, how does chiptune intertextuality appeal to its fans and likewise simultaneously appeal to multiple points of fanish identification in a single musical artifact? Is
Hmm.
chiptune fan identity therefore equally as multifaceted and complex as its creativity? If so, how can we account for this fluidity and what does it reveal about the construction of fan identity through musical interaction? So, initially I was like, oh, this is great. It's so exciting. And then there's a little bit of a just sort of setting out your toolkit for us.
Yeah.
So you reference Nicholas Nova's 8-bit reggae, collision and creolization, discussing the importance of bringing together chip and reggae. And both of those things are a part of that composer's identity. But then the new object they're creating is also like an enactment and, production of identity as well.
Hmm.
You cite Mike Derrico's How to Reformat the Planet, Technostalgia, and the Live Performance of Chip Music, which itself draws on Derrida's notion of hauntology, one of my favorite terms in all of academia. And then Rosie Berdati is all over this work, and somebody that I read a lot, coming to it from a disability studies angle and thinking through notions of the body and post-humanism and identity construction as processual and fluid and flux. And so specifically here you're looking at the theory of nomadic subjectivity for this work.
Yes.
And then at the end, what all of this sort of has in common is that there are intersections here between the compositional practices and one's identity, but there's also an emphasis on the agency of both the human actors and the non-human actors, and then how fandom enters into all of this.
Yeah, and I think, but as I said before, Bradotti for me was a way of sort of tying together so many of the fragments I had of my PhD because and it grew really out of my undergrad. And again, if we're talking about the process of writing, and just for anyone interested, my undergrad thesis looked at sort of video game music fandom more broadly and the kinds of things they do. And so that was like a what question, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do they do? The master's was then why, and that sort of employed affect theory to sort of look at why the relationship with music and musical creativity was so important. And then I wasn't very satisfied with that. So the PhD was how, and I thought, well, how, and then also identity, because we have affect theory on the one hand, but then we have notions of identity that are also important on the other. And they, and if we're thinking about affect theory, which comes from philosophies that can sometimes critique notions of identity, Deleuze and Guattari, and and the like, Bradotti's framework for me really kind of helped coincide those and navigate the complexities of such relationships. And music and identity is one such relationship because music can really strengthen embodiment for us, enact embodiment for us, but at the same time it's transitory, it's
Mm-hmm.
unpredictable, it's affective, it involves non-human, it is a post-human subjectivity in that regard. So that's where it came from, really.
Oh, it's such brilliant deployment, and again, because this isn't always the case. I read plenty of things where I'm not familiar, but having already read had my own read of Bradati, and then seeing how you employed this, it was just so brilliant to see such a different background and a different perspective on it, and then the way that you employ it here. It's we're going to get into it. It's all through this, but I have identified this as your sort of thesis, analyzed as nomadic in the Bradatian sense. The main argument of the thesis in this article contends that the performance and affirmation of chiptune fan identity is continuously reliant on nomadic, affective encounters between fanish desire and the agency of non-human chip musical encounters. In turn, creative chiptune fans have the agency to engender these encounters in view of fanish identification through their ludomusicality. So that's the nice snapshot there of sort of everything that we are going to get into. But then you go on to say there's sort of three pieces to this. The first is these nomadic encounters with the chip sound actors, getting into actor network theory, which we'll see, and their non-human agencies triggering what you call webs of mnemonic and fanish associations. Then secondly, looking at the agency of the chiptune composer in creating or tailoring that experience for the listener, and which itself is also a process of identification and affirmation of identity. And then the entire phenomenon of chiptune fandom as a whole, both the producers and the fans, as nomadically relational between human and non-human agencies. It's really, I love the idea of giving agency to the timbre and the different musical elements, you know, and not just saying it's all, I was going to say technologically deterministic, but for humans, humanistically deterministic.
Yeah. Anthropocentric.
There you go. That's the word. That's the one I was looking for.
Yes, it's or both even. It's neither anthropocentric or technologically deterministic. It is a coming together of agencies here that really interested me, and that was something that again, encountering Bradati's work really helped me put into words. You know, so yeah, that was. I think that was yeah.
So then those three areas are a bit of a walkthrough too, but then we also have the statement of what the article's doing. This article demonstrates the theoretical framework of these lenses through the analysis of an intertextual chiptune, one that rearranges and remixes popular or other film, television, video game music through chiptune's emblematic timbres, stylistic tropes, and compositional practices. I end up quoting you a lot because I had a hard time restating you because I liked your prose too much, so I apologize.
Thank you.
Over quotate. I had this problem with Karen Cook's Emotions in Medievalism article too, where I sent her a message being like, I have a problem with your article. And she's like, oh no, what? And I was like, it's too good.
Well, you said the same on Instagram, and I woke up and looked at the phone and thought, oh my God, like I have a problem with you. I thought, oh my God, what have I done?
Got a beef with you.
Yeah, I thought, oh, where's this going? You know. Someone in the chat just said, Dana, that was the most British apology. Yes, it was. It was. Well, no, I think we've discussed before. Like, looking back, I look back on this article, and there were some things I'd like. Of course, in retrospect, that's part of it. You think, oh, I'd like to change certain. So it doesn't quite present, I don't think, a complete snapshot of what I was trying to do. Those 3 points are important, but perhaps we'll tease them out more in conversation. But I think where I was at the time in thinking about the PhD project, those were sort of key points. And just to quickly touch on what you were saying, because I'm very interested in your sort of approach to Bradati from disability studies, because I had part of the PhD project gathered a wealth of empirical data from not just, and another point I make is that a lot of what's out there are from chip musicians. Who, again, have the capital to be able to perform or, tour, things like that, which is fantastic. But there are people that just listen and enjoy it, and they are as valid, So I collected quite a lot of empirical data, and I encountered one person who was particularly interesting, who said that they suffered an accident and were unable to play guitar as a result, but they found that the Game Boy was very accessible as a means to create music. So I'm wondering if there's a future thing here in relation to Bradati and affirmation and non-normative embodiment in relation to music somewhere. Perhaps there's a seed for a future thought. But I think there's something that there is something there. I think that's a potential crossover, because chiptune and accessibility is talked about a lot, not in the least because you can download trackers free, that because it's in hexadecimal coding, it can make musical parameters more accessible. But I think even the technology itself in some way might have something. Anyway, that's a tangent. I do apologize, but I think there's something interesting there.
And yeah, it's interesting how we got to Braidotti, because I got to Braidotti through Donna Haraway. There was the citations in Haraway of Braidotti, and then I was like, oh, okay, that's the next thing to read. And it didn't end up entering into. It's amazing how much post-humanism I was actually reading with my advisor, and then how it just didn't sort of make it into. I may reference it a couple times, but it didn't become a centerpiece anywhere. But as I always tell people, even when the thing is published, like, these are all catalysts, not culminations. So, the idea is like it's never wasted. It's going to come back at some point. It's going to enter into my work, because you have that moment where you're working on something. You're like, wait, I read something. And then you sort of dig back through your thoughts.
We absolutely should talk about this, because Haraway makes an appearance in the PhD, sort of the penultimate chapter, when I talk about affective encounters and the notion of becoming with. Which links to Latour would call it an actor network, but right. in Braidotti's terms, it's and those kinds of terms, it would be more like assemblage, in that you become with the human and non-human networks in which you're involved in, and that can enhance your vitality or possibly diminish it. So what my interest with that individual that was speaking about the way that Chiptune became a creative outlet for them was that those technologies, those non-human agencies, enabled them to be affirmative, to be, to enhance their vitality in some way. And what's really interesting about the Haraway connection is that Haraway's cyborg, Braidotti's nomadic subject, going back to the rhizomes of Deleuze and Guattari, and even further back to the Spinozist framework that inspires all of this, they're all kind of variations of the same theoretical framework in some way. And I think that there are a lot of connections here. So I think we should absolutely be in touch about this, because it's a very interesting point.
I think we're starting to make some kind of a collaboration idea here with our interest in identity from these different angles. Maybe we'll end up writing something together.
I'm down. I'm so down.
Let's think about that some more. Anyway, so the article moves on to the case study as a good way of explicating some of these ideas is Starman 64, which if you throw that into a YouTube search, what actually comes up is David Bowie's Starman encoded like Super Mario 64. So it's a different 64. In this case, we're talking about the Commodore 64. So a little earlier. This is David Bowie's Starman encoded as a Commodore 64 SID chip arrangement by Rock. And for probably obvious reasons, I'm not going to play the original Bowie. It will get struck immediately. But I have a feeling this one will pass through with less trouble. We probably won't do the whole thing, but there is a text description here as well, that the vocal melody is presented in kind of that nasal, I liked that description, nasal sawtooth wave. The harmony is covered in a single channel through rapid arpeggiation, which a lot of us associate with early consoles. That's a technique to sort of fill out the texture, and
it's a limitation too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, since you can't have a chord playing, you just arpeggiate the chord.
Right.
But the rapid arpeggiation itself becomes kind of an expected sound, and it adds like texture and density and rhythmic interest and all of these things that sort of now we associate with that sound.
Well, that's the thing. It's a very deliberate, and again, it's a hypermediacy. You are very deliberately choosing to do this for harmony. I call them, in my research, I call them telephone chords, because they sound like like 80s telephones when they this is the saddest thing I've ever said. I think some 80s telephones do like a minor sixth. So when it sounds slightly unpleasant.
Yeah.
But it's a similar kind of
oscillation.
It's a similar thing. It's oscillating between two notes, and your brain goes, well, I hear two things so rapidly that it sounds bubbling, So I think, and again, it's now become as you say, it's a trope. It's become something that is actively remediated. So
let's take a quick listen to the beginning of this, just to get a sense of it. had like a breaking news vibe right there.
Yeah, coming up, and then they do this.
Oh, it's so good. And so this is from an album. Was this right after Bowie died? They put together
It was a posthumous tribute,
a
yeah. And
tribute.
the reason the Bowie came about, I was sort of looking for good intertextual examples. I mean, Bowie's always been, as I imagine for many of us, has been quite a profound influence and a figure in our lives. But we also recently at Kingston had the opening of the Visconti studio, with Tony Visconti came along to open our new analog hybrid, and there's a lot of research going on there into analog technologies, and I thought, well, early digital deserves some love as well, and I remember sort of finding random stuff, and the Bowie example came up, and I thought this is really, really superb. And as you said, the way that the Commodore SID chip kind of handles things like the portamento, there's something about that just really, I don't know what it was, I can't put it into words because again it involves timbre and words can never capture these things adequately. It was something that really I found really quite touching about this, and again there's something about limitations and hearing a machine that can't quite grasp it do its best. There was something about that quite struck me. So yeah, it's a beautiful arrangement, I think.
And you can really feel in these types of arrangements, I feel the labor of the person in making the translation to chiptune.
Yeah, I think that also comes. It can also come back to the authenticity factor slightly problematically. But no. I hear what you're. It's an important point because I hear what you're saying, because a lot of the even timbre in chiptune, you can even, what you're meant to be kind of hearing is the fact that somebody has gone around a limitation in order to produce a fully fleshed out arrangement. So even when it's sounding, you hear, oh, they've deployed pulse width modulation to make movement. They've done the telephone chords or something, white noise drums filtered. But then I think some people then go on the tangent of, oh, well, you just did this through a VST, and you did, and again, I think, oh, for goodness sake, because, but even when you're using samples and VSTs, you have to use your ears, you have to arrange with these sounds that can clash very easily, so I think even in any kind of chip music, that craftspersonship is still there.
And I always detect that kind of like love, it comes from a love of both. As you say, that there's an intersection here. There's the love of the original Bowie song and the connection that rock had to Bowie's music, but then also a connection to the Commodore 64 sound, and then this bridge that gets created between the two. We're using both, and then making something new. And like, I often feel like these arrangements just have this energy to them where it's like when you have good cooking and you can taste the love that went into it, You're like, the special ingredient was love. It's kind of I know it's dippy of me to say that, but I hear that in a lot of this music, and that's part of like the energy and the excitement of listening to it for me.
I guess you're very much. It's funny how I'm thinking grandma's cooking.
Yeah. I cook like a grandma, so that's apt.
Yeah, I think like the irony for me is my grandmother, bless her, she hated any kind of electronic stuff like this, and I can still, because my granddad used to have a Game Boy. That was another thing that I used to hear, and obsessed with Tetris. And she would swear in Armenian under her breath when she heard the stuff. But I get what you mean. That there is a sentimentality to it. There's something that kind of, again, hearing a machine that is limited but still singing its heart out. There's something,
and
there's something about
the work of the translation, I think, demonstrates that like you had to take time and do this lovingly, to create an effective translation of it. So I think that's maybe what the energy that I pick up on when there's an arrangement, or some of the OC remix things that we've played on stream, where you can tell like folks have a long history with some of this music, and they are really trying to make something new with it, and also sort of like honor their own relationship to the original.
That comes down to it. It's almost like a kind of a tribute that's deeply personal, as in doing it through an instrument that they are familiar. The Commodore 64. There's something about the self being injected into that. And even in that video, you see some pixel art of the Starman. So that there's something. Yeah, it's almost like that incorporation of the self in a way that kind of strings together multiple aspects into something that's quite intense. I find it, because it's bringing together so many different fragments of identity and things that would not normally cross. But similarly, I've heard, as I said before, that some cover versions are celebrated, some not so much, things like that. So I think it's such crossovers are quite interesting for that reason, right. Sort of the reaction they get.
Yeah, so Matt Hillstreet's fandom is fluid, multiple, and dynamic. That comes up in the more you read about identity theory. I feel like those are terms that show up in a lot of different authors, but also in fandom. And here we see that this is an intertextual citation, that we're drawing on multiple points of reference. And so through this conflation of these subcultural citations, Rock's piece is ludomusically playing with and mediating the chronology of temporality and memory too, because all of these things are situated in time for us as well, in our encounters with them and sort of the historical time, that we're assigning to the sound. So I love that notion of temporality in this equation.
Well, this comes back to hauntology as well, which I write about specifically when I talk about timbre in my thesis, because hauntology, by very nature of its function, sort of dislocates, remediates memory and time, right. And for example, another key example of this, I don't know if anyone in the chat is a fan of these kinds of things, but soundtracks for movies that didn't exist. Or soundtracks for video games that never existed. Leon Chang's Bird World, for example, is an album that kind of used Super Nintendo sounds and creates this world that's, you almost think, well, this is a video game I think I played when I was little, but but it never existed. I think it's quite interesting, this kind of play with cultural memory, individual memory, time, place, and space. So I think that's very integral to chiptune in many ways. Of course, not all strands of its practice, but I think it can form a key component, definitely.
Yeah. So next we get into nomadic theorization. Nomadic subject sense of self and identity is continuously synthesized in relation to affective encounters with other entities. This is not to say that subjectivity is entirely at the mercy of external agencies. Bradati also understands desire as sustaining subject formation, and the meeting of these agencies define the affective encounter. So identity is contingent, it is fluid, it's never fixed, even at the moments when they create a synthesis between encounters and desires. And beyond that, the composers can then tailor or impact the encounter that we're going to have as listeners with their music through the compositional choices that they're making. And again, simultaneously, they are also producing and acting their own identity, because they're not working from a fixed identity and then a thing comes out. I like that everything is in flux here. Like everything absolutely is constantly an active process.
That's the thing, and I think what you said earlier about this, notions of identity being in flux are well established by now. This goes back, but what I think Bradati then does is say, well, yes, it is, but then also points of stability, embodying identity is also important. How do we then? The paradox here is that the stability of identity comes through process and continual process, and it's contingent. How do we navigate this? How do we understand it? And what better to enact that process than music, and in particular, as I said, chip music raises other interesting problems in terms of timbre and technology. So, yeah, it's about kind of navigating the complexity of fluidity while also recognizing that on an experiential level, stability is important, or embodying a sense of self is very important to us. I look back. I think the word synthesis perhaps isn't correct. And I'm slightly, again, I look back and I think, because a synthesis kind of implies an equal weighting, perhaps, or something that has. My point really, what I was getting at was that it's not so much a synthesis. It's not equally weighted, as in human agency, non-human agency, because music acts on our phenomenology in ways that we have no control over. And again, we can tailor certain things. We can deliberately use certain tools, certain ways of working to achieve certain effects, but those effects aren't guaranteed, as you sort of touched upon. So I think that was what I was really trying to set up there.
Yeah. Subjectivity is this and I like the point about like we do have some sense of stable elements of identity,
Mm.
um, because we're not always like not everyone is aware of the way that they are kind of continuously maybe coming back to those touchstones or like reenacting them, but like obviously there is a stability or we wouldn't be able to talk about anything in our own identities. You know, there have to be some things that are constants that we kind of come back to again and again, and then as we come back to them, like we are kind of re um,
Yeah.
reproducing, you know, those aspects of our identity. So we have this web going on, and again we're drawing on time here with experiences and memories, emotional connections, and again the human and non-human entities. And then here we start to bring it into conversation with Isabel Van Effren and Elfren and Charlie Blake. I can't speak today. Charlie Blake. Expand Latourian actor network theory, ANT, as most of us see it written out, to musical listening, where the listener is an actor in the network, but they also experience musical and non-musical actors. So that can be things like melody, rhythm, timbre, harmony, articulation, and technological mediation. So it's not just people that serve as actors.
Yeah, and that's the point I wanted. Again, this goes back to the moving away from the anthropocentrism and also technological determination, and the use of Latour, really, just to sort of put it into context, the PhD thesis is kind of split into three sort of key segments, wherein I break down chiptune at the beginning, like looking at the experiences of chip musicians and fans, break that down through Latour, which, just to sort of clarify, is a kind of a sociological framework to look at if you have a given network, let's say a garden, for example, and you think, well, we have an experience of the garden, what that is. Let's break it down into its component parts, what humans and non-humans are doing, the water sprinkler system, the fence, what the humans that own the garden are, and look at their agencies in the process and how they produce the effect. So I do a similar thing with actor network theory and music that Blake and Van Elfren do, and then look at what those actors do individually, and then Bradotti helps me look at them coming together, so that there's if that
triangulation, kind of
yeah, because, and again I know we've spoken before about and again, I don't know if this will be useful for people watching, but the sort of the ways if you're doing a smaller paper but you really want to kind of get a larger picture, you know, sometimes it can just be really quite useful to have what I would perhaps think of as an hourglass shape, wherein you sort of identify a larger problem, but then if you home in on a specific case study, i.e. what I try to do with 8-Bit Bowie, and then open out again to its implications, you know, I think that's what as opposed to taking it, in relation to what my paper does in relation to the PhD, I think that would probably be how I contextualize it. So.
Oh yeah, that's interesting to think about, sort of the overall shape of an individual chapter or an article, because I've seen people talk about more of like a funnel one way or the other instead of coming back out. You know, the idea of zooming in on, you know, a specific case study and then broadening out, or starting with the broad and then jumping into something more specific. I like the idea here. We're adding another dimension, another curve here. So you identify some of our actors here.
Yes.
The 8 and 16-bit timbres that are distinctive to a particular console can serve as a timbral musical actor, helping listeners categorize the chiptune. Certainly, if you hear something for like a Sega Master System versus Commodore 64 versus NES, that sort of, even for a chip fan, it sort of helps them contextualize that a little bit.
Yeah.
And then that encounter between the timbre and the listener impacts their constructed subjectivity. Some of our non-musical actors, though, include things like memories, nostalgia, self-identification, video gaming pleasures that are evoked, and subcultural capital. So all of these different elements are taking part in this encounter between the listener and this piece of music. And the listener is then constructing a subject position through the agency of these relations.
Correct. And I think, and again, even those things that I mention as examples are not exhaustive of the kinds of things that occur in chiptune.
Right.
And so, for example, video gaming and chiptune has gone. I mean, it's kind of it's not quite. It depends who you ask, and it depends on the generation. Sometimes, I mean, for some it has a very strong association with video gaming culture. For some, it doesn't and stands rightfully on its own. And for some, it kind of blurs both. I think some ways that perhaps sometimes more journalistic responses sort of portray it as a kind of sort of something that's very much still linked to video gaming culture. I don't think it will ever lose those roots for some, and that's fine. But I think it doesn't encompass all of it. And the same with nostalgia. I think there's an interesting conversation around that, and I'm hoping to sort of write a future paper. I want to kind of address this sort of relationship because I know many people who were sort of born post 2000 and feel nostalgic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's something interesting.
Anemoia is the
Well, it's
right?
interesting because they that names I find fascinating because it kind of there's a lot of sort of names for these kind of nostalgias, but it all is fundamentally a form of yearning for another and something that is not now. And there's a my interest here. What I want to say on the flip side,
I specifically said anemoia. It's Karen Cook's favorite word. So shout out to Karen Cook. Yeah, anemoia comes up a lot in medievalisms too. Like
right.
This idea of like we're kind of yearning and we're.
Well, I thought about this in Karen's Ludo paper actually because I was thinking, well, there's a link here because my point with this was let's not think, oh, what is this symptomatic that they're sort of yearning for a time that they never. What is the music doing?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? It's kind of there's an affective encounter again that lived experience does not matter in this, and especially with I don't know if you remember at NAGFAGM, sometimes they said, well, I think some of the questions were like, well, what is the future of chiptune? It might go the same way as goth and medievalism. In 50 years, they might still be chipping stuff and no one will have, or even after that, no one will have been alive even anymore to remember the 80s or the 90s, but people will still be chipping things, So I think that there's in the same way that goth and medievalism, there's no one still around that was there from back then, but there's still a nostalgic attraction. So, but anyway, again, another tangent. I'm doing this a lot. I'm very sorry. But I think but you see what I mean? These are all kinds of, there's a multiplicity of things that kind of impact here. And that's what I was really getting at.
Yeah. And nicely here, these different areas are not disparate. There are connections here. The actor network theory and the nomadic subjectivity do share some features that sort of help bridge some of these areas, and particularly this notion of relational interaction with other entities. And I love this line. You say, we may approach media from a sense of who we are, but we are also changed by the encounter.
That's a paraphrase of Janet Wolfe, who was I think looking at the uses of nomadic subjects in popular culture, and particularly in her work on feminist writing. And this was a reflection on the work of Lawrence Grossberg, who was probably one of the first to use terms like affect in its Deleuzian sense of the term in relation to popular culture. But yeah, I thought that was such an important point because I think that so nicely captures what I'm getting at, is that while we use technologies of the self to, and music being one of them, but these things also have an agency in shaping that outcome, and I think that was my key point there, really.
Yeah, so we encounter chiptune. It changes us. It produces our identity. It roots us in our sense of identity. It's a lot of different things happening all in the single encounter. So again, long quote, because I also liked this point.
Oh,
every song on an album potentially affords a different listening subjectivity. I love that thought. A sense of who we are in relation to that song and its attributed meanings, our subjectivities, and even moods and memories consistently shifting as the CD or iPhone runs through a track list, or as we select specific tracks depending on how or even who we feel at the time. That really resonated. Like I know that I have those different like musical moods of who I am in the moment. So yeah, thus while musical actor networks have their own transformative agency, the listener in turn transforms them with meanings based upon memory and connotation as filtered through their Finnish and musical literacies.
But it's interesting. I was because that came about through I think when I was sort of writing this paper, and I would go for walks, and how I was feeling at the time. And the shuffle button enacts a kind of a nomadism of subjectivity because I think one song I'd play, I think, oh Christ, I don't want to listen to that, and then something would really resonate with me, and it could be different the next. Do you see what I mean? You're kind of taken through different fragments that you've kind of assembled of your identity in playlists, but you don't want to listen to the same stuff over and over. There's a kind of this. I found that quite interesting, and that can change moment by moment. This can change day to day. Some stuff I listened to last year, I think I hate that now, or vice versa. Do you know what I mean?
Or you rediscover something that you haven't listened to in a while. Yeah, it's
right.
It's a moment-to-moment thing.
And the beauty of like the immediacy of rediscovering something, because the affectivity of it is like it's never left. The intensities that kind of overwhelm you. There's and in the same way that if you listen to something that absolutely you don't resonate with and you hate, you are changed. Your whole mood changes. Your ability, and again, to sort of go into Bradotti terms, your ability to affect and to be affective changes depending on your encounters here. So I think that, yeah.
And just thinking about how if I have an individual song that was important to me, maybe as a teenager or something, it's one thing to listen to that song in isolation, maybe on Spotify, it comes up randomly on a playlist, versus finding an old mixtape or a mix CD that like a high school boyfriend made me that includes that song, and like it's not just about that song, it's about that specific ordering of songs that was made by this other person, and now that whole playlist represents that relationship and that moment and that memory. This really resonated with me here. This idea of like each song and the relationships between songs are all doing these things with identity as well.
Well, then you could perhaps consider the playlist as a kind of cartography. Of that particular, what was going on. Like you said, it was in relation to a relationship or something. It's a kind of affective mapping of what was going on in some ways, and so I think that's quite an interesting sort of other way of thinking about it. But with chiptune as well, I mean, like certain sounds, I like the Amiga, the way that the Amiga mediates audio to me will always be it's sort of ingrained in, as I said, every cell of my body. I just every time I hear, it's almost like it chews up samples and spits them out again with these crunches and these aliases. But some sound chips, for example, I love, Sega Mega Drive FM, but when sometimes I can hear it in my teeth. I don't, it just doesn't, something can be very off about it that just doesn't resonate with me properly. So again, I'm with that kind of tangent into the shuffle mode, every song on the CD, I'm kind of thinking, our musicking practices are also extremely fluid and nomadic.
Yes. And as Julian points out, that there's also the materiality at play there. If I have the Spotify playlist versus some kind of a device that I'm playing something on, or the actual CD, or there's the materiality entering into this as well. It's not all disembodied digital everything. That can be important. And even thinking about materiality in terms of like texture, you just talked about hearing it in your teeth. There's like a materiality to the sound wave in that moment.
Well, that's again, I think that kind of it comes back again to timbre, and also I think because even digital stuff has a materiality. Sound is material. And that's the perplexing thing about it, is that it's
physical waves acting on us.
It's pressures in the air, but it's also wholly immaterial, because we then Isabella van Elfren's latest book on timbre, which I think I recommend to anybody, because it kind of, this is why I think I'm sort of going to look at chiptune more broadly, and I talked about this on my Ludo 2022 paper on chiptune and queerness. There's an interesting kind of, you have a physical wave, something that is material, but then it translates into the subjective.
Yes.
So you kind of, there's something, it is about embodiment. It's not about a gap between subject object. That's eradicated here, because it is about embodiment. It's as Bradotti puts it, the embodiment of the brain and the embrayment of the body, which is a beautiful quote. And what better, I think, to do that than sound? So
Yeah, you think of the translation of the sound wave, and then the whole mechanism inside your ear translating things into electrical signals, that getting into the brain. Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
it's a translation the whole way through.
Then into the realm of phenomenology, but also not limited to phenomenology, because it happens in spite of human subjectivity. So I think, I think that's where things will go. Sorry, again, I've taken you on another tangent.
I'm just going to keep us moving because I have to leave at 3, so I will.
I'm so sorry. No,
okay. It is not your problem. I just have to go play a wedding. So it's all Disney today, which will be kind of interesting. Talk about nostalgia and connections with music, right? This person wants to walk down the aisle to Disney music. Wow. Which is actually pretty common. So anyway, I love this relationship here. Fans need the music in order to inhabit the space of being a fan, and being a fan is an active process, not a fixed identity. Even if it feels like one of those more stable elements of your identity, you have to. And we're borrowing the Christopher Small musicking here, right? You have to do the musicking here to produce your fandom, as much as your fandom means you have to do the musicking. It's this. It goes both ways.
Yeah, and I think this also extends from criticism, and it kind of relates slightly to what you're saying about the record collection thing. A lot of music fan studies tend to focus on things like record collecting, posters, stuff you get from conferences, conference on the brain, a concert. There we go. Rather than the actual act of engaging with music itself. So I think there's also a sort of an undercurrent here, because with some of my critiques of music fan studies sort of coming through. But I think, again, with the way it's related to chiptune is that it's, again, highlighting the agency of the music itself, timbre and so forth.
Yes. So we have we move on a bit to the agency of the composer and engendering these chip sound encounters. And then here we get into Heimat, or homeland, which is coming from fan studies scholar Cornel Sandvoss, where media texts serve as these emotional homes for us through which a fan may sustain belongings and identifications. And what's neat about this is you don't only have one home, you can have as many homes as you have an interest in having, and the boundaries of those can be fluid, and they can even become conflated with our real world spaces. So as I look over at my shelf here, and I've got my little Mario holding a violin, it's I have all my little fan. I don't know.
I'm sat around several Daleks at the moment, so this is great.
Yeah, I have to take a tour here. Yeah, so I've got my little Donkey Kong Jr. Game & Watch. I've got my Rob, the robot. And these are actually Hallmark Christmas ornaments of the NES and the Super. I just got the Super NES. And if you press the button, it plays sounds from the original game. And, it's the idea of I'm filling, pieces of my home with representations of this object of fandom too, right?
Let's also then go back to actor network theory, because these things, even the decals on the back wall, have an agency in mediating a certain kind of atmosphere, a certain kind of, and even as we watch you on stream, kinds of clues we get about what you're interested in, and the kinds of, do you see what I mean? They have they have an agency. They are acting in the Latourian sense of the term.
Yes.
So when I talk about things like sort of certain technological mediation and timbre, kind of being the sound of home in some way. I think my 2019 Ludo paper, I said that for chiptune, home is where the haunt is, because you need that. Do you know what I mean? You kind of need that hauntology of a certain kind of sound, in the same way that pixel art uses certain techniques, it uses certain, But I think that the Heimat is an interesting concept. I slightly not abandoned it, but what I did do in the PhD was put it in conversation with Small's musicking, because I thought, well, we have Heimat, an object, something that feels a bit static. Why not put it in, why do you have homecoming, a process, it's, and approach it from there. So these principles still stand. It's not a home in the sense of a literal space. It's an embodied experience of these sounds are me. They empower me. They are home. They make me feel certain things or remember certain things. So that's really where I was going at with the use of this theory.
Yeah, the homecoming, the desire for these encounters. And then
Yeah.
composers can create new ones for us, even based on the other Heimat's that we have. You know, if Bowie is one of yours and Commodore 64 is one of yours, here you go. Here's Starman 64. So
Right.
in that way, they do have some agency to partially direct the encounters. It's not totally out of everyone's hands. There are human actors that are playing important roles here, and the sounds become sort of like musical citations. But even then, that only goes so far, because it's not going to produce the exact same significance for every listener because of the nature of the subjectivity construction described before.
Yeah. So, for example, if you have, so if Bowie is sacrosanct to some people, and you know, you do an 8-bit version, home, that's not home. You know,
Right.
that's something, that's not belonging. That's a you know, something is off. That's not affirmative. So it goes both ways. It's not all about affirmation in the sense of it's always so.
It doesn't always feel right.
Right.
It has to resonate.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also then tied into affect and so forth. I think you've sort of the post-human agency of musical encounters is sort of touched upon there. So.
Yeah. So then, just some of the by ways of summary here. Chiptune composition in relation to fan identity is then a process of fanishly and nomadically reflecting on and thus musically citing who I currently am, what I am a fan of, or where and when do I wish to evoke. And participants are not always chiptune fans. They must keep becoming chiptune fans through the post-human agency of musical encounters, just as so much identity theory talks about process. Similarly, being a fan is a process that you keep enacting. And you can sort of have fandom go dormant. You know, you can be less engaged with an object, come back to it later. So it isn't always something that you have to do all the time in order for it to be important to your identity, but like just noting that this is a process.
Yeah, and I mean that's what's also another thing that attracted me to Bridotti. She talks about the kind of the seasonal nature of certain affirmations and the way things are changing all the time. You know, you can, like as we said, some songs really still will always resonate with us. Some things we think, oh, you know, that's a part of my life I'm not going back to, and then some things come back to us as though they've never left. You know, I think that seasonal thing is also really important, and desire as well in this framework is not always conscious. It's also largely unconscious. You know, the ways in which what I think I'm kind of what I was trying to do is sort of map out the ways that desire enacts musicking in some way, or steers musicking practices.
Yeah. So chiptune fan identity is a play of subjectivities constructed of heterogeneous musical, technological, and subcultural tastes and narratives that are contingent to the participants' fanish desire and sense of self. And chiptune composition becomes a practice of affirming and interconnecting multiple desired fanish identifications by musically citing non-musical and non/human. So non-musical, musical, non-human, human actors or encounters. And then back to Starman 64 at the end to kind of tie a nice bow on everything. We can view this so many different ways. It can be pastiche, it can be ironic, it can be a novelty, it can be as good or better than the original. And noting that, you know, the creation of this in the first place involves Rock performing and affirming multiple fandoms by bringing them together and showing how both inform parts of his identity, as again this sort of like trace of them that we're detecting in the work that's produced. And that all of Chiptune's Ludomusicality is intertextual, not just this type of overt juxtaposition that we see in an arrangement like this. So even if it's newly written, I just love this framing. All of the Ludomusicality is intertextual. And then kind of closing on, I mean, this is me, not a direct quote, but the idea of fandom is a journey, not a destination. Just like identity, I suppose, is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
or it can be a brief destination, right? You can stop there for a moment and have your encounter and
of course, that's also made in the point of the nomadic subject. They're not always in transition. They can
right.
stop for as long as they need to. It's just that there's no sort of desire for fixity.
Yeah.
And
you can have those homecomings. You can stop into different homes and have your visits and
right, and affirm yourself and, you know, embody certain things, certain ideas, but they always change. They're always in process. So I think yeah, I think that was that kind of destination idea came primarily from Matt Hill's work
Mm-hmm.
on fandom. I thought, well, I thought that's why I really want to expand on things, like I think that was kind of like a key sort of point there.
And that brings us to the end of our whirlwind tour of what is clearly just like the opening of the door into the broader project. So was this published after the PhD had been finalized, or were you still
No,
in?
well, I took some time out from study that year. Actually, there was a lot of things going on, so that it was sort of a culmination of where I was up to at that point. And then the PhD was finally submitted in 2020, December 2020, and then the Viva sort of came after that, and now it's all finally done. So things had developed sort of after that.
Yeah. It's
But
just
it was
interesting that, because so many people also, they do the PhD and then they pull an article out of it. So I like to kind of know the direct, it's like, this is a nice entry point to then go read the larger project.
right.
Because there are also instances where somebody turns their PhD into something else, and so they say, "Oh, I'd really prefer you read the book or the article that came out of," because like I've refined it from there. So there's certainly more space available in the PhD thesis to be able to go in and get into some more detail on all of these things. This is certainly a snapshot and a good one, and really useful and thought provoking. But I think the thesis itself is recommended reading beyond this.
Thank you. Well, I was very fortunate that Matt Hills was my external, and said I would be very happy to have a book proposal. So this is what I'm currently working on of the thesis. So
Yay.
that should be out. I'd also like to, while I'm here, we're also hoping to do an edited collection on Chiptune, perhaps hoping to incorporate a variety of perspectives. I don't know if anyone here has submitted, but we're sort of thinking, well, present company, what we're sort of thinking of doing going forward, especially based on feedback from the community, because accessibility has also been a big concern of ours. So what we think might occur going forward is that we will have the more sort of academic ludomusicology stuff as a specialist journal. And then the voices, the sort of collection of interviews and such will be sort of a book publication. So we're sort of planning things at the moment, but we're really quite excited with where things are going here. So again, please get in contact if you're interested or you want some pixel art, or I'm just happy that. But yeah, so there's a lot of publication stuff on the horizon, and very, very exciting stuff. But the article, as I said, it was a snapshot of a moment in time. And it was, even sort of quite a difficult period. But again, advice: just please don't ever put work before your own health, because I think that year I certainly learned the hard way. And then COVID happened, and I just thought, my goodness, I just have to finish the PhD and so on and so forth. So, but I'm glad that it's resonated so well, at least, and I look forward to developing it further. So.
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely. It's been so great having you. I'm sure I will have you on again in the future if the stream continues.
Oh, gladly.
Luckily, more work keeps coming out all the time. So like I never have to worry that I'm going to run out of things to do on the stream.
Well, that and again, as I said to you the other day, this is such an important initiative, and so valuable. And I just thank you not only for having me on, but for what you do. I think I speak for many of us here that we really, truly appreciate your work. So thank you.
It's very, as I'm booking some folks on for later in the summer, and I was talking to Tim Summers, and I was saying it's a little bit self-serving, because I get to have these great conversations with you all, and sort of hang out with you, and also celebrate your work, and read things in more detail, maybe things that I skimmed or hadn't had time to get to yet. It's a nice accountability tool for me. So if it creates that sort of community space for everybody else as well,
Well,
It's well worth
absolutely,
the
and
time.
I'll go one further because I think sort of completing the PhD in the midst of the pandemic and also with other things going on, I became very shut away for a while. So to do things like this and to reach out like this and to engage with people again, albeit I know we're distanced when we're doing this virtually, is extremely important. So again, thank you because I speak for all of us. It's not been very easy. It's been so difficult, and
It
yeah, I
continues
can't
to
even
be,
put it,
right?
yeah, right. I can't even put it into words. But I just want to say thanks because this has sincerely made my week, and I look forward to all the things coming. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining me. Next week, we will have on Julianne Grasso, and we're going to be looking at Julianne's canon colloquy entry. Since we saw Jen's already, we're going to we'll probably work through all of them at some point. Um, but since I wanted to have Julianne on the early side, because I'm close to Julianne, we stream together, and the AMS study group had already booked her Final Fantasy IV chapter for later in
Wow.
the summer. I was like, I want to have you on earlier, so this is purely just so I can hang out with. I'm basically working through all my closest friends first because it's less scary to ask you all than it is to reach out to folks I haven't met and be like, will you be on my new stream? But hopefully, so far everyone has been very gracious in my ask. So you all can just stay on your toes and know that asks are probably coming as I continue to fill out the schedule.
As well, like I said, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much, and to also see the art
It looks
it's
so
you.
wonderful. It looks so wonderful, and it's very fitting for my identity that I'm
Oh,
constantly
there,
enacting by streaming with your art.
there we go. And the non-human agencies of pixels. There we go. There.
Yes. Have a good one,
Thanks.
everyone. Bye bye.
Bye bye.